Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. I hear this morning was pretty great. Got some nods out there? Yeah? All right. Excellent. My name is Kim Lasharity, and I am the Executive Director of Citizen Engagement and Design with GDX. Does everyone know what GDX is? GDX is government's Digital Experience Office. We are part of Citizen Services. I have the privilege of leading government service design and citizen engagement practices. That means that we work with ministries all the way across government when they need to engage citizens on potential changes that they might want to make to programs or policies or services. We also work with ministries if they have a problem to solve around service. So we use our service design practice to reimagine a service that better meets user needs. When my mom asks me, what is it that you do in government? I've been doing this for 23 years. I say, Mom, my job is to be obsessed with citizens and how they interact with government. Not just online, but in person. This means my job is also to talk to program area staff and ministry executives and help them understand what their user needs are so that they can better meet user needs. What a concept, right? So as you might imagine in my role, there's sometimes a rub between citizen needs and government needs. They're not always well aligned. I often find myself in the business of disruption, trying to figure out how to make change and innovation happen in the system that we all work within, which is no small task. So, it's easy and fair to say that I have a really healthy obsession with innovation. It's something that I've really been focused on for a number of years in my career, and that's why I'm so pleased today to introduce your keynote this afternoon, Larry Keely. I'll tell you a little bit about Larry. He is the president and co-founder of Doblin, Inc., which is an innovation strategy firm known for pioneering systems that greatly improve innovation success rates. Doblin is now a unit of Deloitte Consulting, where Larry serves as a director. Bloomberg Businessweek named Larry one of 7 innovation gurus who are changing the field. It's pretty great, right? Larry told me ahead of time to kind of lower the expectations. Like, maybe he can help us fix toilets or something, but my expectations are a little higher than that. Because Larry also has been selected one of the 27 most influential designers in the world. And coming from a service design practice, that's pretty darn exciting to me. Larry is also the co-author of a book entitled The 10 Types of Innovation, the Discipline of Building Breakthroughs. And I have read dozens, maybe hundreds of books and articles on innovation. And let me tell you, not many of them actually go to the point of categorizing innovation types. And this book does that. And it does that, and it actually provides really rich, practical tools and information to help you understand how to break things down and move systems forward. Larry is also a teacher in innovation strategy classes at the Institute of Design in Chicago. Might have to get back to Chicago, Larry. He lectures in executive education programs at Kellogg Graduate School of Management, and he's an adjunct faculty member for their core MBA and Master of Manufacturing Management program, where he was recently named a Distinguished Fellow. If that's not enough, Larry also serves as a member of Mayo Clinic's External Advisory Board. So folks, it's my honor to introduce to you today our keynote, Larry Keely, to the stage.
Thank you, Kim. Very kind. I do want to say, when your plumbing's not working, if the toilet's stuck, that is one of the most important things you want to get done all day, right? I mean, it's not that bad to come in and fix a stuck toilet, it seems to me. But look, I think it's really a thrill to be here together with one of the organizations in the world that I think is putting the pieces together to get government to be one of the parts of modern life we're most proud of, instead of one of the parts of modern life that we tend to be disappointed in chronically or to be annoyed by. There's a humorist in my country, he's no longer alive, but Will Rogers used to say, "Thank goodness we don't get all the government we pay for." And I think that's an attitude that outside of Canada is pretty commonplace. In Canada, one of the things that I love, and I was born in this country, is that people actually expect the government to be first decent and second competent. And the people in this room are the folks that bring those expectations to life, and I'm grateful for that. That said, I do want to say that even though I think you have brilliant and beautiful bits and pieces that you're building painstakingly and systematically, it still feels to me like the people in this room, by and large, are waiting for other ministries to show up and say, "Wow, you folks are pretty good. We'd like to use some of your capabilities." And so if we're successful in the brief amount of time that I have, I'm going to try to give you a sense of what it means to make innovation obligatory, not optional, to have it be routine instead of rare, and to have it be bold instead of just steadily moving known practices a little bit up and to the right on some graph all the time, okay? And so I hope that that is a helpful conversation in the midst of the extraordinary strategic capabilities that I've been watching you build and visiting in the various booths that are available here at OCIO Connect, okay? I've broken down the material that I'm going to share with you in 3 bite-sized nuggets. The first one is about thinking big instead of little. I think by and large, we're in a moment of pretty extraordinary change, okay? So let me just ask a calibration question. How many of you think we live in the most intense time of change in the history of our species? Show of hands. Okay, that's most of the hands in the room. If you try to get a real answer to that tough question, it's actually hard, okay? So you ask that question of an anthropologist or a sociologist, and this is what they do. They try to imagine a small child born today, let's say a woman child in rural India or rural China, and they try to develop an assessment of how much her standard of living is going to change in her lifetime. Compare that to the rate of change for her parents and her grandparents, looking across 3 generations, and then go back in history and say, when in the course of human events was there a similar improvement in standard of living across multiple generations? And when you do the analysis in this disciplined way, what you discover is that there are actually 4 times of change in the history of our species that are somewhat similar to what you and I are experiencing day in and day out. But here's the thing. None of those other 4 times of change were in living memory. So you cannot sit at the feet of your beloved Granny and say, "Gee, Granny, what was it like when the Persians invented the number 0? That must have been super badass, huh?" And so you can be forgiven for thinking that you live in an extraordinary time of change. You do live in one of the most extraordinary times of change, and I think the other attribute we can all agree on is that whatever you think the rate of change is today, Thursday, tomorrow, Friday, the data suggests that it's going to be marginally somewhat more intense. And again, a little bit more intense on Saturday and on and on. So the time of change is not only extraordinary, but it's accelerating. Okay, now the way we as regular Joes and Josephines the world over experience that is by seeing disruptions that are coming in many parts of everyday life and at a faster cadence than what we're used to. So when we were kids, there was broadcasters that you would watch TV channels from, and they've steadily given up territory to people doing streaming, of course. And we used to take taxis, and now we use an app to get somebody who's participating in the gig economy to show up and give us a ride. And the world's largest manufacturer of internal combustion engines has watched an upstart, very tiny, sort of very, very tiny compared to their scale, seizing the global imagination about radically altering the entire mechanisms of transportation on the planet. The people that invented telephones, telephony, cables, copper cable, and then fiber optic cable, and then transatlantic cables, and priced their services so that the single most expensive thing you could do was to call overseas. watched in mounting horror as somebody gave that away completely for free. And even the world's largest and best-run malls, and when I'm in the States, I talk about the Mall of America, which perversely has significantly more submarines in it than the entire nation of Canada, have been outflanked, outmanaged, and massively outgunned by the likes of Amazon in this part of the world or Alibaba in other parts of the world. These are the disruptions we now consider normal. And again, I'm going to ask a calibration question. Show of hands this time. What's changing faster, the lives of the citizens here in British Columbia or in Canada, or the changes that we're able to engineer inside of government ministries? How many of you think the lives of the citizens are changing faster? How many of you think the government ministries are keeping pace? Could you look around the room, ladies and gentlemen? I do not see a single hand up. If I did see a hand up, I'd be worried about a delusion problem, so I'm not being critical. But I want you to know that at some base level of diagnostic, what you've just indicated is that we're in trouble. When the lives of the citizens were in business to serve, changing at a clock speed that is even a little bit higher than the clock speed of government, we're setting up a condition where over time we're less and less respected, and over time we're less and less relevant. And that's the basic condition that the people in this room have been given the opportunity to think about and to transform and to catalyze and to challenge and to change. And one of the things about that's really interesting is that there are many characteristics in modern life, thinking big now, that we can tap into. So as we sit here on this Thursday morning, one of the things that I find interesting is that there's more and more unicorns. And what you want to do where you can is to pay attention to them individually and collectively and say, why is the world so grateful for these things? Now in America, you might have noticed we have a bunch of really obnoxious billionaires. And there's another guy who's a billionaire many times over that you've never heard of, I'm betting. How many of you have never heard of Rich Barton, so I can calibrate? That's most of you. Yeah, well, Rich Barton just keeps doing the same basic, simple thing over and over again. What he does is he finds things that are stupid and he makes them pleasant, okay? So about 30 years ago, he wondered why he couldn't figure out the price of taking an airplane from Seattle, where he lived, to Las Vegas, where he wanted to go, without visiting an abstruse specialist called a travel agent, having them pull up a whole ridiculous-looking screen of green numbers, do some magic incantations, and then tell him the price of the flight. He thought that was stupid, so he created Expedia so that we could do it ourselves. Sold that for well over $1 billion to Microsoft, and the first time he ever had enough money to buy a nice house, he thought, how come nobody can tell me the price of a house? I have to go to an abstruse specialist called a real estate agent. They do magic incantations, and they tell me what the price should be of the house I want to buy, or worse, the price should be of the house I want to sell. And after a while, Rich started to suspect that they were not very interested in getting that price to be sort of balanced in his favor, but rather to have a transaction really quickly. He thought that was stupid, so he created Zillow and sold it for over $1 billion. About that time, he discovered that you can join various organizations and be their indentured slave for a while, and he thought, why is it that you can never know what it's like to work there until you're already working there? And he thought that was stupid, so he created Glassdoor. Would you look at the playbook here, ladies and gentlemen? It's always the same. Take something that's a black box and annoying, turn it into a glass box so you can see the mechanisms and manage it yourself and make better choices as an actual grown-up. Anybody besides me in the room think that maybe government needs a heavy dose of this? Right. So again, learning to see the plays in the playbook and having a way to do that routinely and reliably is a way to think big. Now I got to tell you, and because I have so much enormous, genuine respect and frankly jealousy about the way the Canadian government comports itself, you have an actual constitutional requirement to not be stupid. In my country, we need that urgently. as an amendment to our Constitution. But one of the things that I think we all know is that we live in a time where people expect very rapid change, and that's characterized, as you see here, by mobility tools, right? Let me make sure we all understand why this matters. As we sit here on a Thursday morning, afternoon rather, there are 2.8 million apps for your Android devices and 2.2 million for your iOS devices, and nobody needs that many, right? So you hear about the cool ones from your friends, and you plug them in, and they manage themselves from that point on. They sort of self-organizing, self-optimizing, rated open, porous. They get better all the time. If you happen to be one of the programming teams behind any one of those, you walk into your office and you see a report on what's broken down yesterday. It even is smart enough to point you to the offending areas in the code that you should probably be paying attention to. That is a radically different ecosystem for accelerating progress. And whether you look at it from the vantage point of you and me as users, millions of things to choose from, each one cheap and readily available. We can try them for size and see if they make a difference in our life, and then if they do, assimilate them into our lives. Looking at it from the vantage point of a service provider, it's a fast, easy, low-cost way to reach millions of users that probably already have access to this kind of device or something like it. That changes the rate of change, but the principle I'm trying to elucidate is at the top of this slide. For the first time in history, ladies and gentlemen, one of the watershed change moments that the OCIO teams can sort of tap into is this idea that 21st century innovation is much more about the elegant integration of well-known things than it is about the primary invention of truly new things. Learning to be curious, to bring together stuff that makes a difference, and to turn it into something elegant and useful is really the way innovation works today. Now, does government do that? By and large, no. Many years ago, working with my brilliant mentor, guy who had started all three of the three largest design firms in the United States and in the world when he was alive, I was stupid, and whatever Kim said about that journalist that said I was a top designer, I don't have any design training, I don't have any actual talent, and I'm usually awed by great design. And at lunch that day with Jay Doblin, I said to him, so Jay, how do you determine what the great design problems are of our time? He said, oh, that's easy. I said, for you? How do I tell? He says, you just look at the structure of the cabinet of the President of the United States. He says, and what you discover is all the juicy problems, okay? So you look at the structures: agriculture, commerce, defense, education, energy, health, housing, interior, justice, labor, state, treasury, and transportation, and veterans. He says, those are the juicy problems, and one thing you can be sure of, and this is true in the States, less true here, is that whatever, politicians is in charge has no clue how to fix that problem. Those are the juicy, evergreen design problems. They always need to be rethought. And I thought, wow, that's so elegant. Later, as you might know, some of you, my little team, Doblin, has learned how to diagnose innovation patterns on any topic anywhere in the world. We're obsessed about that. And what we've discovered is that, by and large, government, at least in my country, uses only two types of innovation and doesn't even use those with any particular skill. Okay? The rule of thumb is if you want to change the world or change a category, you need to be using at least 5 types of innovation. So there's a massive gulf in the way my country's government tends to innovate. I was privileged to work with the Obama government. That was back when we had a president, some of you might recall, with functioning brain cells. And it was super refreshing. And one of the things that we built for him was the innovation unit that was specifically challenged to make different parts of government at least 10x better than the status quo in measurable, objective ways. And you have the same capabilities. They're distributed. Sometimes they're subscale. Sometimes they work episodically instead of in an integrated way, and in most cases it's optional whether anybody else avails themselves of those capabilities. So that's what I want to talk about next. what does it mean to innovate effectively? This is the second of the basic topics I want to talk to. Okay? Innovation is always tough, but my goodness, it gets easier if you root out the lore and substitute logic, if you root out the myths and substitute methods. And along with my colleagues who have been doing this now for 4 decades, all we've tried to do is to treat innovation as a science, to bring skepticism and to bring evidence and to try to determine over and over and over again what are the recurring problems, how do you tackle those problems with disciplined tools, and how do you prove that the approach you're taking works instead of fails. Incidentally, many of you are taking photographs of the slides, which you're totally welcome to do, but I'm trying to be generous with this stuff, so I've already posted them for you on a secure website, and I will reveal that unto you at the tail end of the festivities, I promise, okay? But as Kim said, I wrote a book about this topic. You know, there's 2,700 books on the topic of innovation, so, you know, what the world really needed was another one. And I spent 5 years in a dark closet writing this thing, which was unbelievably epically stupid. And I spent a lot of money trying to get it right. And I say this not as a sales pitch for the book, but as a rueful admission of personal idiocy, you see. And this is the day that I figured that out. I came out of my writing closet blinking like a gopher, and I bumped into one of my brilliant cultural anthropologists, and she vaguely remembered that I had started the company some years before and thought she should be polite. So she said, "How's that book thing coming?" And I thought she was sincere. You know, so I started to give her an answer. I said, you know, the data in chapter 14 is kind of kicking my butt, and she's doing this. She's backing up, and she's distancing herself from me and nodding and paying attention to her phone and giving me every signal she could that she really urgently needed to be in a different postal code. And yet, this is the thing about anthropologists. She turns her head over her shoulder, and she says to me, "You know, nobody reads books anymore, right?" And I thought, shit. That's why you hire anthropologists. They tell you how the world really works, okay? Now, I know most of you don't have time or, for that matter, inclination to read an actual book. So let me now distill for you the methods and the tools and the discoveries that are codified in this book, beginning with this one. This is actually really important. This is the most deeply researched framework in the history of innovation. Vijay Kumar, our head of methods, is generally considered to be the world's best innovation methodologist. His own book, 101 Design Methods, is seminal, vital, and really, really important because it's the first book on design methods to update that topic in 4 decades. But what we asked him to do, me and you and Duncan, who managed the project and now runs global telephony for McKinsey, we said, geez, you know, why don't we gather up the things that were so important that they changed industries or categories or the whole world? And we gathered up a huge, disparate array of such things. You know, the Model T Ford, 230 years old at the time. The whole idea of antibiotics and penicillin, the advent of refrigeration, the ability to do calculus, all kinds of things that were so strange and so disconnected from one another that we thought all we would get in trying to cross-compare them was noise. But Vijay Kumar put 1,200 plus such things into computers and condensed them using pattern recognition and a variety of other techniques, and he came out of his little computing closet one day and said, "I think I found something," and we said, "Do tell." And he said, "It turns out there have always been 10 distinct types of innovation." Now, color at Doblin is never random and never decorative. So the colors on this slide matter most. That stuff in blue, it's taught in the better business schools. The stuff in gold, it's taught in engineering schools, and the stuff in red is taught in design or social science schools. So the one thing I know for sure is that all the important design problems are inherently team challenges. You need to bring an awful lot of eyes and talent and, and teams to bear, and they need to be trained separately. How many of you in the room have advanced business degrees? Okay, a handful. How many of you have advanced design degrees or social science degrees? And how many of you have advanced engineering degrees? Who has more than one of those degrees? Okay, one egghead. Anybody have all three? Okay, so if anybody did have all three of those degrees, trust me on this, they'd be insufferable and really hard to work with. But what's important is that even when you have multiple kinds of talent in the room, the challenge is to get people to work together. Let me illustrate. If there are business people in the room, they nearly always assume that they're large and in charge, right? Because they're managing the money, they're doing something that they assume is dominant and most important. So they're the ones that usually show up and say, this is really important, we're looking forward to your creative ideas. The last 5, 6, 7 times we tried to innovate, it wasn't pretty. It crashed and burned and people lost their jobs. Thank you for volunteering to be on the all-important innovation team. This time, of course, failure is not an option, and all the resources of the department will be placed at your disposal, unless they cost money. And just remember that whatever you produce is supposed to produce at least $100 million in income revenues by this time next year, 48% gross margin, 31% RONA, and everything's going to be fine. And then they leave in a haze of blue smoke, right? Meanwhile, there's the engineers. They're the ones that are sitting in the back of the room. Their arms are folded. They're not making eye contact with anybody. If you could read the thought bubble over their head, which would be a little dark, it would be saying something like, nobody in this whole meeting gets the system. I get the system. Just wait for this meeting to be over. I'm going to change whatever the hell I decide to change because I get the system, right? And then there's the designers. They've been hepped up on design thinking. They got the black T-shirts. They got the sticky dots, Post-it notes. They got the full toolkit. And they're prone to injecting such important moments in the conversation like, let's think like a 2-year-old. How about we build a prototype and test it? So those are all je ne sais quoi, kind of lovely little moments in a meeting and keep it from being dull. They get a little brittle over time. And those are the failure modes. What I try to do all the time instead is to get these different kinds of skills to be at their best, not their worst, to be able to respect one another, to truly collaborate, and to do the things with the right protocols that cause them to lift each other up. And not to talk past each other, but to really do the hard work of trying to imagine something completely new and completely different. When you do that with the right tools, what you get, and this is really important, is a smaller number of bigger ideas. See, brainstorming is one of those carcinogens that surgeons general should get around to regulating. Almost everything in what we think of as innovation systems, which I call innovation theater, is really about generating a huge number of little ideas. What we mostly need is a smaller number of bigger ideas. That's what Apple does all the time, okay? Second thing you get is that those ideas are easier to implement. You know what it's going to take to pull them off. And the third thing that you get is they're harder for others to copy. Usually they can't even figure out all the magic you brought to bear on doing the thing you're trying to do. So think about that for a second. Just squint at it a bit. Smaller number of ideas, bolder concepts, easier to implement, harder to copy. Does that feel to anybody else in the room besides me like it might be the DNA of badass breakthroughs? It is. The evidence is clear. Throughout history, last 200 plus years, it's always been that combination of things that makes a difference. One of the ways this is a really exciting place to stand. One of the things that I do to try to create the evidence about that is to talk about what the best contributions are. So with engineers, you should be asking a question like this. Hey, what has recently become practical, affordable, achievable, that we should start to use? With business-trained people, you want to ask the question, how could we do this, even with our constrained budgets, and have it get smarter, faster, like every time we turn the crank, it just gets a little better, like Google does, and have that happen at a very fast clip and at scale, and maybe throw off enough free cash flow to earn us the privilege of doing it over again. And with the designers, you want to say, well, what are human beings really trying to do? What lives outside of this problem? What gets in their way? What irritates them? What is the friction source? When you learn to ask those kinds of questions in a balanced way, you get a quicker take on what's next in the world. If you also do it with your heart in the right place, you also create things that are sustainable, not just energy sustainable, but sustainable in the sense that the citizens are grateful for them. They're grateful for the department of the government that has done this. They're grateful for the support and the thoughtfulness that the government is evidencing. And rule of thumb, ladies and gentlemen, vitally important. You want to create something that is going to get its unfair share of attention, use 5 or more types of innovation. All 3 colors have to be used. And think about something that others aren't doing, that's just otherwise going to fall through the cracks. Now, I teach this to graduate students frequently, and I've discovered that graduate students in modern times now have the attention span of squirrels on meth. So I can't even take as much time as I just took trying to talk to you about it with them. And what I've learned to do is to say, look, dude, you want to create something that's going to make you filthy, stinking rich. Here's what you do. You got to create something that's culturally cool. That's the first of 3 tests. I often use Black Panther as an illustration, right? Set in a real continent, Africa, but a fake country, Wakanda, and centered around a non-existent molecule called vibranium, but it nevertheless tells a really inspiring story about a very smart, positive culture. Anybody notice that in the Black Panther world of Wakanda, it's the women that run the universities and the government and the R&D centers? The guys just fight the stupid fights, right? So yeah, I know. Thank you. I have 3 daughters. That's the way I feel. So, but what is my evidence that it's culturally cool? When it debuted 2 years ago, it was #1 in global box office for 6 straight weeks, a phenomenon that has not happened in the movie business in 30 years. So it's culturally cool. Second test you have to pass is your ideas have to be technically elegant. Whatever you think of Elon Musk, and I personally think he's a bit of a nut job, you know, what's interesting is he's built a lot of functionality into his vehicles that people are really kind of amazed by, including the way you can stand, you know, a couple blocks away and push a button on your app, say, come to me. The car is smart enough to say, oh, I better open the garage door first, and it'll open the garage door, start itself up, and drive to wherever you are. These cars are already designed to be autonomous vehicles. It just doesn't have permission yet from most governments to turn on that functionality, okay? So it's technically elegant. And the third thing is it has to be perceived as being fairly priced and easily accessed and useful. And I don't know what else you think of Google these days. It's got a dark side to it, as we're all aware, but in the earliest days, when you could use this unbelievably elegantly designed, you know, sort of interface, type in your query, the number of O's would extend to show you how many things that the system had found that related to your query, but it has this I'm feeling lucky button because the confidence at Google was very high that their algorithm would dump you right to the #1 thing most likely to be useful to you. So that is amazing, #1, but they charged you nothing for that. Okay, which made it unbelievable. And it immediately wiped out 14 other search engines. So that is the genetic code, same exact thing I just taught you, but a different way. You want to win in innovation, you got to be culturally cool, you got to be technically elegant, and you've got to produce a fair business model. And to connect it back to the earlier thing, culturally cool, that's the stuff in red. Technically elegant, that's the stuff in gold. Fair business model, that's the stuff in blue, okay? Once again, we're seeing the iteration. Now, unfortunately, the #1 most common mistake when teams are asked to innovate is they're asked to innovate on something too tiny. They're asked to make a better product or a better service, okay? What I can tell you, again, with an enormous amount of evidence behind me, lots and lots of data about this, is that really the minimum thing you should be thinking about is a platform. Ongoing capability that makes it easy for people to do hard things. When I was a kid, that's what platforms consisted of. Those of you that are trying to recognize them, let me help you with that. Those were the shoes worn by Elton John in the Goodbye Yellow Brick Road Tour 19, never mind. Anyway, what's interesting is that since he was wearing those silly shoes, all this digital stuff has come along that cuts across industries and geographies and radically altered the way businesses, industries, governments function the world over. And that is pretty interesting. Here are the most popular consumer platforms as we sit here at this moment, least valuable of which is worth 30 billion US dollars, and the most valuable more than 10 times that. And here are the most valuable business-to-business platforms in the world. You use every one of these every day. You cannot escape these suckers. Least valuable worth 40 billion US dollars, and the most valuable is worth well over 500 billion US dollars. When we think in terms of platforms, not just a little product or a little mobile app or a little service that we're trying to improve, we immediately get more leverage, more impact, and we create something the whole world finds valuable. Now, the way that works for any individual one is like you see here. Google not only created its search capability, but all these other capabilities. From the get-go, they were using 9 types of innovation. They added a 10th type of innovation when they reinvented their search capabilities for mobile tools, which they did in part with $2.2 billion worth of acquisitions. And they have gone on to create things with their alphabet, sort of investments and capabilities, like Sidewalk Labs, which is getting pretty close to your domain. Sidewalk Labs is their attempt to try to, harness the power of data and the power of sort of computing infrastructure to transform how we live in cities, and nobody's doing that more aggressively than your neighbors to the east in Toronto. So Toronto's made a major commitment to Sidewalk Labs, and Google Alphabet, Google's parent company, has said that they plan to invest as much as $1.3 billion in the ideas that are being prototyped in Toronto. That's thinking big. I do worry a little bit that the sort of other agenda that Google always has is once one city helps them to think through the really cool advances, they then sell it quite profitably to every other city in the world. So you want to watch out for how you negotiate these deals, but I am very proud of the fact that Toronto is, for the moment, the single best, sort of showcase city and developmental partner that they have anywhere in the world. Incidentally, you should have noticed, or I should have mentioned, that it's 8 types of innovation just in Sidewalk Labs that Google is using. Other platforms of note are the people that are creating the very best team tools so that all the people in this room and all the other ministries you serve can be connected with digital stuff to make it easier to do things. This Australian company has been using 10 types of innovation from the very get-go. From time to time, they take one of their successful things, in this case, HipChat, and sell it to Microsoft for $1 billion or so in order to give them more developmental capital to make other tools. But here's the deal that I want you to all understand. A common mistake is for people to think that the core of all of this is technology. We over-index on that. The evidence is crystal clear that that's not the right way to think. Indeed, there is no technology that people are creating these days that isn't abundantly available in low-cost modular form for you to license. So what happens is people think it's 80, 90, even 95% of the problem to get the technology right, and that's not true. It's usually 2 to 5% of the problem to get the technology right. What instead people are ignoring, although I have to say, not in the work that I'm seeing from you, is getting the experience to be engineered brilliantly and getting it to work economically in a way that is really quite astute. So how do you do that? Well, one of the tools that at Doblin we prize is high protocol innovation, the opposite of brainstorming. So instead of getting well-intentioned people in a room and saying, okay, innovate now, which I just think is cruel, right? I think the cruelest thing we do to smart people is stick them in a room and say, okay, innovate now. Like you couldn't do it yesterday because it was Wednesday, but now I'm yelling at you, and so somehow or other you learned how to do it overnight. I think that's roughly the equivalent of standing out in front of the Fairmont Empress and thumping everybody on the head, picking the ones that sound ripest, stick them in a room and say, okay, do neurosurgery now. We'll turn up the lights a little brighter and we'll get you some rubbing alcohol. I hear infection control is important. What about an X-Acto knife? Would that help? And that's roughly where we are with the things that people do to innovate. This is the opposite. This is version 11 of a technology that we've slaved over for about 19 years. And what it does is it codifies what you should ask any team to do. Stick a team in a room with this tool for half a day and ask them only to answer the 14 questions on this page. And instead of generating, 173 ideas, you know how brainstorming works? More ideas is better than fewer ideas. Wrong. There's no such thing as a bad idea. Wrong. Anybody catching the Trump presidency? So what's important is to give people a sense of what things to ask in what sequence in order to get a smaller number of bigger ideas. That's what this page is all about. This page tells you how to build those things. This page tells you how to build them cheaper, a lot cheaper and a lot faster. And this page gets the business model right. We're getting innovation to give up its secrets, ladies and gentlemen, at exactly the time when we need to do it faster and better and more boldly, okay? Now, many years ago, with one of my Innovation Navy SEALs at Dublin, I said to Ryan Patel, as I passed him in the hall one day, I said, Ryan, if there's only 10 types of innovation, why don't you give me a generic list of all the options under each one? Now, this guy has an advanced degree in innovation. He's a freaking genius, and yet he had this charming kind of crabby personality that we all love. And he looked at me and says, that would be hard. And I said, I know, Ryan. That's why I'm not doing it. So I forgot all about it, and I, bumped into him again 7 weeks later. He says, I got that thing. I said, what thing, Ryan? He says, that list of tactics you asked for. I says, show me, dude. And so he did. He gave me this eye chart. And I did all the mean things I normally do to my own colleagues. I said, well, how do you know it's right? And he taught me his method, and it was pretty darn good. And I said, well, how often are you finding new ones? He says, well, originally all the time, and now it's trickling down to almost nothing. And anyway, I kept asking him these questions. He always had good answers. I finally knew how to attack him. I says, but Ryan, dude, you're a designer. How come it's so ugly? And, of course, he was 10 steps ahead of me. Does it amuse anybody else besides me that you can now deal yourself a poker hand of innovation? I mean, how cool is that? Ryan had turned it into a deck of cards, which you can buy off of Amazon. And it's just so great because the current deck has 116 known tactics in it, and it's color-coded by the types of innovation. So if you need a better, sort of profit model, or you need to collaborate in a new way, or you need a different channel strategy, and you need a different, end-user experience strategy, Ryan has figured out the 116 known ones, and you can just run through them. Or if you're feeling lucky, you just deal out a poker hand and then innovate around the ones you get. It's really, really an amazing advance in how to make innovation more accessible. For any individual card, color-coded to the type of innovation, a really clever and very good little sharp analogy of somebody doing it well, a tiny bit of protocol about how to use it, and it's just you're off to the races. So even when innovation is hard, there are ways to try to make it easy and more accessible. The other thing I've been thinking could be really powerful here in BC is to get a deeper sense of how and when to use prizes. In my country, there's one switched-on part of government, hasn't been ruined yet, called DARPA, which has got a long history of creating important prize challenges. In the history of the world, of course, prize challenges have been really important. Dava Sobel wrote this great book, Longitude, about an ancient challenge to try to create a robust and reliable precision timepiece to use at sea. You need to know where you are at sea. You need a sextant to look at the stars back in those days, and you needed to know the time very precisely. But clocks mostly worked off of, things that were affected by the motions of the waves. And so that was a $10,000 prize, a lot of money back when it was done in the, 1800s. Charles Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic Ocean to win a prize. There are prizes from J.D. Powers, there are prizes from DARPA, there are prizes from Netflix to improve their algorithms for making recommendations. The X Prize is now a big organization that tries to address this, and one thing for further reading I'm going to sort of urge you all to get a copy of, and it's available to you for the low, low everyday price of free, from the McKinsey Global Institute, called And the Winner Is. It's the first discipline analysis to the mechanisms of prizes, and the first paragraph, brilliantly written by one of my graduate students, went, every time in the history of the world any organization has put out a design prize, the world spends 17 times to 19 times that much money trying to win the prize. And surprisingly, the approaches they take are so disparate and so diverse and so surprising that you'll often get breakthrough answers instead of predictable answers from these prize mechanisms. So that's another tool in your toolbox I would love to see OCIO using. One of the big things that you're trying to emphasize with one another is data elegance. So let me just again ask a calibration question. How many of you have never heard of second spectrum? Okay, that's most of you, but a surprise. How many of you have heard of it? Okay, most of you are just refusing to answer questions. Okay, so in second spectrum, this is a bunch of data eggheads that were big fans of Moneyball. Remember the Michael Lewis story about using data in sports? And they decided that what would make them happiest in life, very brilliant advanced data scientists, is if they could win every summer the MIT Sloan School of Management competition in sabermetrics for sports data analytics. And this is one of the things that they've been building over the last few years. This is a real-time analysis of people playing basketball. And everything that you're seeing is created by the computing system that they've invented. So the player with the ball is lifted off the court and colored red. And what you're seeing is the whole thing truncates the analysis down to the options that that player has right now. That player could shoot, and from the place he is when he's got two defenders in front of him, the probability drawn from the pattern of his shots from every single instance since he's been in high school says that he's got a 45% chance of getting 2 points. But notice he has other options. He could pass a long pass to the foreground left, and he has a 35% chance of getting his teammate to get a 3-point shot. He could do a little bloop pass behind him, and that player has a long 3-point shot with only a 30% chance of success. But colored in green, best choice, is a shovel pass to his right to one of his colleagues who from that point has a killer 3-point shot that he almost never misses. That's the best choice. Now the computer is doing something amazing. It's not waiting till 3 weeks after this game is over to give these guys this analysis. It's actually darkening everything that's distracting. And it does that algorithmically in order to highlight what this player's options are. Now, it is inconvenient to play professional basketball while wearing Google Glass. And it may not even be legal. I haven't checked the rules. So this is what's called coaching mode for Second Spectrum's capability. And if that player or any other player on the team makes the wrong choice, 3 times in any 5-minute period, when they go over to get a towel, one of the coaches is going to say, "Dude, you're being a pig. Throw the ball every once in a while, will you?" And now how does this work? For the people in this room, what you should know, of course, and you're quite good at this, is understanding that data elegance needs to be matched up with protocols about how you act. So let's take apart what Second Spectrum is doing. What they've got is a massive data collection that's proprietary. They've got analytic models, so they know in any given moment of a game, and for any sport, hockey or American-style football or global-style football, what matters in that moment to the player who's supposed to make a choice, okay? And then the next thing that they do is have real-time visualization so that they can do a close examination of details and do overlays of what goes on and then do effective storytelling about that, which is really quite remarkable. And you might have caught this after, Steve Ballmer was finished screwing up Microsoft pretty badly for a bunch of time. He had a chance to retire, and the way we do that in America is we make people very, very wealthy on their way out the door, and so he had lots and lots of cash to burn. He decided to buy himself a professional basketball team, the Clippers. And he heard about these guys, You know, essentially 25 professionals in LA with a startup nobody heard of. And he dropped by and said, what do you fellas do here? And they showed him the exact capability I just showed you. And he said, what's your plan? And they said, oh, you know, over 5 or 8 or maybe 10 years, we're going to transform how people play and coach and watch sports. And he says, no, you're not. You need to do that right now for the Clippers this year. It's one of the things that's cool, ladies and gentlemen. When you get these things right, the whole world shows up and says, oh my goodness, I need this now, okay? That's what comes of thinking big. Now here's a frustration for you and for me and for everybody that's trying to do thoughtful things in government. Most of the world is being retrofitted to fast-moving ecosystems. A small number of things in the world were designed from the get-go as fast-moving ecosystems, okay? And those things that were designed that way from the jump tend to work at 20 times the clock speed of the industries or the economies they're situated in. Whoa, that's why it feels so weird. And it's also why there's such an enormous gulf between the people that do it and the people that sort of talk about it. Let's illustrate that with Airbnb. How many of you have been guests in an Airbnb, property? A very large number of you. How many of you have been hosts for Airbnb? Okay, so one of the things that's pretty cool at Airbnb, if you ever get a chance to go visit their corporate headquarters in San Francisco, they've actually got the journey maps done by anthropologists in the lobby. So you can stand there even before going through security and learn what it takes to design something so that people will trust strangers and try a home. And even more surprisingly, trust strangers and entrust their home to those individuals. From the very get-go, Joe and Brian figured out how to create a system based on trust. Their TED Talk is famous for this. Audience about twice this size. What they said was, okay, take out your cell phone, unlock it, and hand it to a stranger near you. How'd that make you feel? And they said, we needed to do something just like that and to get it to happen all the time. There's so many people in the room that have used Airbnb. How many of you think you know how it works? Just show of hands. Yeah, I get that from my graduate students all the time. I bet that's not right. I mean, really, do you know how to design a system so that anybody in the nation of Canada could use assets they do not own, do it reliably, and make sure there's no contention for those assets and they're priced fairly and when they're available and not available? Because that's actually, hard. And what I do with my graduate students is I make them understand these things deeply. Here's the deal. These guys, in just the first 6 years, managed to become larger than all 3 of the world's largest hotel chains put together. So when I'm talking specifically to my engineering students, I say, you better darn well be able to tell me how they did it. And most of them can't, so I'm going to do it for you, okay? Here's the actual tech stack that makes Airbnb function. Turns out there's 20 application and data capabilities, 16 DevOps, 13 utilities, and 8 business tools. I mean, who knew? Okay? 40% of those, by the way, are from modules from Amazon Web Services. So about $300 million a month moves from Airbnb to Jeff Bezos' pocket because of the way he engineered their capabilities. Now, a question you might ask is, all right, can I just do this? And I like that question because that's one that really matters. If there was an engineer in the room from Airbnb, they'd say, now hang on a second, Larry, we have some secret sauce. There's some things we know how to do that others don't know how to do. So let's honor that claim for a moment. What is it among these capabilities that's proprietary to Airbnb? Well, there's 1 of the application and data capabilities, 2 of the DevOps, 3 of the utilities, and 1 business tool that is slightly proprietary. So I went to a really smart guy and my Deloitte Digital colleagues, and I said, dude, how long would it take you to do a workaround for these 7 capabilities? And he says, can I have lunch? And I said, are you hungry? He says, yeah, a little bit. I says, well, go have lunch. He was confused. He thought I needed him to build it, and all I wanted him to do was to tell me how long it would take, right? And when we finally got clear with one another, he says, well, if I skip lunch, I could do it for you in 3 hours, but if you let me have lunch, I can have it done in 5 hours. So ladies and gentlemen, if you have not yet built a global capability that orchestrates assets you do not own and makes it easier for other people to use it while trusting strangers, and doing so with epic robustness. I've just shown you how. Okay? But here's the larger point. How many of you have raised teenagers? Anybody in the room? You're pretty young. Yeah, so first, my sympathy. For those of you that have not yet raised teenagers, it's certainly surreal. They show up at meal times. Hard to get them out of their, phones and their apps. And if you do, it's just usually for a surly comment or two. And yet, all over the world, what we've invested in fairly heavily is our children's fearlessness with Lego building bricks, right? And what you're learning from these apps is that that's what our teenagers now do when they go build things. They just use the kinds of apps like Lego building bricks that are interoperable and interchangeable and robust and that do hard things. That's how it actually functions. Innovation is much the same way, so I'm now going to show you very quickly, since my time is up, what you install to get innovation to happen routinely and reliably. And I'm here to tell you that much of this exists. I've been spending a lot of time wandering through the booths around here. You need signature tradecraft, you need good diagnostics, you need a center of excellence represented by the talent in this room, you need an innovation mission, which should be coming from each and every ministry. On top of that, you need to see themes. Like I shared with Rich Barton, take things that are annoying and complicated and nobody understands them and make them transparent and sort of self-oriented and do it yourself. But the things that are at the top are the ones that nobody is yet using in this or similar governments. You're not using metrics, incentives, and rewards to make it required at other ministries that they use your extraordinary capabilities. In a perfect world, what would happen to build on all of the extraordinary capabilities you've built is to make sure that the other parts of the government are required to use it by ensuring that senior ministers had to sponsor transformational initiatives, used you to do it, and you taught the high potential young people in each of those ministries how to be successful. When you don't know anything about this topic, the normal success rate for innovation is south of 5%. That is to say, out of every 100 initiatives that people undertake, 4 or 5 of those return the cost of capital. When you use just the stuff in the sub-basement, you get a 35% success rate. Add the stuff in the middle, you get 50% success rates. Add the stuff in the top, you start to approximate 70% success rates. This is my evidence that innovation, for the first time in history, and at a time of extraordinary change, is giving up its secrets. We can teach it to anybody. The corollary to that is then you can expect it from everyone. And that's a beautiful thing. All right, last couple things I want to go because it says I got 6 minutes and 46 seconds left. What really would I be doing if I had the gorilla surgically attached to my back that you all have attached to yours? Okay? What would you do? What should you do? What could you do? Well, this thing says 6 minutes, 32 seconds, and you say 2. Well, I'll talk faster, okay? There's a lot of things you're already doing. The UK government was the first to take seriously the notion of nudges, okay, which was a Danny Kahneman Nobel Prize winning advance in the field in 2002. You have a nudge unit, a behavioral insights unit, okay? And that's super impressive. What you also want to be able to do is to understand what it might mean, not to do individual projects that you wait for some minister to come and sponsor, but to begin to prototype integrated capabilities across, BC, that would start to be beautiful and brilliant. Singapore is one of the examples. I'm only showing you a segment of it, but this is the one integrated website that you go to in Singapore to start a business. And everything you need to do, no matter what ministry it sort of affects, is integrated underneath that goal. There's a similar web portal for citizens that makes it super easy for citizens to do all the things that they need to do to be good citizens or to get the services that they might be entitled to and maybe even not aware of. Those two things say, in the Singaporean government, we need to be great for people that are trying to start businesses and great in being of service to the citizens. Here's that Danny Kahneman capability. when he was first doing this as an egghead, he had this terrible title. He says, yeah, we're thinking about bounded rationality and endemic irrationality, okay? So naturally, it took a while before the world understood how important all these different biases are that we suffer from. But eventually, even in Norway, they figured out it was pretty darn smart, so they gave him the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002. His own book, Thinking Fast and Slow, will give you a deep view of this, but a faster read, an easier read, and a more pleasant read is Michael Lewis's brilliant book called The Undoing Project, where he talks about this idea of designing around people's irrational behavioral norms, okay? And you can see that also in Wikipedia, because now, since 2002, people have taken this so seriously that there are literally hundreds of things we've codified about what human beings do that are kind of nuts. But when you design into them, you get unbelievably better outcomes. You had the digital teams from Estonia come visit at this conference about 3 years ago, I understand. And I want to underscore one more time the principles that made the advance in Estonia, amongst all governments in the world, one of the fastest to get impact anybody has ever seen. In Estonia, they had one thing going for them that was really quite remarkable. They had a great deal of emphasis over a long period of time on, sort of the precursors, the infrastructure for being digital, and then they issued a sort of national ID card, not dissimilar from your services card for individuals, okay? And that is extremely cool. Then they start to, sort of get things to be real. So what they did for every ministry is said, y'all have been telling us the reasons why you're different, and you have to use a different computing system for a long time, and we're just not going to tolerate that anymore. This is the new shared data structure and required data environment that you all have to use. But then it got really interesting. What they said is your budget next year, it's going to be, essentially set notionally at 0. And you'll restore your budget on the basis of however many things you've done that citizens are grateful for and that they're using their ID cards to access. I know. Think about that as a little mechanism to create a little tiny bit of demand for the kinds of design capabilities you guys are quite good at, right? This is what I mean when I say the heart of it is learning to make innovation obligatory, not optional, and causing there to be demand to use extraordinary design skills much faster than they would otherwise be used and deployed at great rates, and to have the citizens always feel like they're in the center of that revolution and that they get a chance to say, boy, these are the things that are just knockouts. That is a simple piece of news you can use and principles you can steal. This is my final summary. Almost all organizations that I'm lucky enough to work with everywhere in the world sense that they need to change their rate of change. That was the place we started in this room, okay? We've studied this topic for a really long time, and we try to sort of create the tradecraft that makes that easy instead of hard. When you do it in the right way, that means being skeptical about innovation and being able to laugh at yourselves if you're doing things that don't work very, very well. The most common mistakes are to focus too tightly on simple little things or too frequently on technology as if it was the answer. Okay? What I've been trying to give you is a sense that that's compounded by poor processes. In your case, excellent processes, but where in almost every case it's optional for others to access them or use them or even know about them. Okay? That's a problem that needs solving. When you do it in the right ways, you get to robust, repeatable capabilities, high protocol innovation instead of low protocol innovation. That matters a great deal. And finally, the last thing for you is that I think you're in a position to do this better than anybody. A lot of things that went before you, whether it was in Estonia or in Singapore or Toronto, were done in days when those things were harder, rarer, and more costly. You've already done most of the hard work of finding the talent that's trying to make the world a better place. Now the chance is to bring it together and to do it with integrated capabilities. Okay? And if you do that in a way that I think everybody in the room that I've been lucky enough to talk to so far genuinely wants to achieve, you really will change the rate of change. You really will deliver on this extraordinary and beautiful Canadian promise to try to make a government that is really instrumental to advancing the lives of the citizens you're in business to serve. If you want the slides, send an email to support@doblin.com, mention anything about OCIO, and a smart person will send the slides to you, okay? And I just want to say how much I appreciated the chance to be with you today. I love the work that you're doing. Always inspiring to me is a phrase written by George Bernard Shaw 58 years ago, when he said, you know, God may have made this world, but that's no excuse for us not to make it better. That's your invitation. That's your opportunity. That's your obligation to do it in this place that's eager to see you do it and eager to see some successes coming out of it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.